Hi everybody, and welcome to the Thunder Bay Community Auditorium. This place, I gotta say, is gorgeous. 1,200 seats in Northwestern Ontario, a spectacular theater, and that's where we are tonight. Our second program here in the Lakehead on the shores of Lake Superior. Northwestern Ontario, like many other resource-rich regions, can be susceptible to boom and bust as the demand for particular commodities shifts. The Ring of Fire, a potentially multi-billion-dollar chromite find northeast of here, brought great promise to the region. But for all of the project's promised success, there have been huge obstacles along the way, and we're going to get into all of that tonight. Joining us now for an update of where things are at with the Ring of Fire, we welcome Grand Chief Harvey Yesno, the Grand Chief of Anishinaabe Nation, Michael Gravel, Minister of Northern Development and Mines and the MPP for Thunder Bay Superior North, and Al Coutts, the CEO of Noront Resources. And I wonder if I could ask this audience for a warm welcome for our three guests here tonight.
Thank you.
Can I also say, we also have two members of Parliament in the audience. I'm going to turn my back to the camera for a second. I see Bruce Heyer from the Green Party here. John Rafferty's in the back there. And Stan Beardy, Chief Beardy. We welcome you three as well to our audience and to our broadcast production here this evening. Let's bring the map up if we can and show everybody the part of the province that we're talking about, because if you are like a lot of people south of the French River, you may not know this area of Ontario very well. Northwestern Ontario, shaded in red, and we're going to have a closer up look at the Ring of Fire, which is a long way from here even. And let's start with this. Last spring, the Matawa First Nations and the Ontario government reached, Minister Gravel, I guess what they call an agreement to have an agreement. It was a framework to get started. Just explain to us what the significance, in your view, of that was.
It's a good place to start, Steve, and thank you so much for being here. It's an important program, I think, for people to understand how important this project can be. But certainly the regional framework agreement that we signed almost exactly a year ago was historic. To enter into negotiations with the Matawa First Nations, 9 First Nations, which will be most directly impacted by the Ring of Fire, was important. And what we did was sign this framework. Premier Wynne was part of that celebration, and we're now in phase 2, which it really is about ensuring that benefits do accrue to the First Nations most directly impacted by the Ring of Fire. So we're talking about regional infrastructure needs. We're talking about resource revenue sharing, which people talk about with some frequency, talking about socioeconomic supports, and speaking about opportunities to provide community access for perhaps the first time after many years of talking about it. So that's a very important piece, and we're very pleased that we were able to do that, and phase 2 negotiations are happening as we speak.
Grand Chief, he sounds quite bullish. Are you as bullish as to what this represents?
Let me just say first, I'm also a member of one of the communities in there, and I think after years gone by, I hear a lot from community members on that. So I don't actually share the same enthusiasm that Minister Gravel has about the progress that has happened, because I think there's a lot of questions.
Like what?
From community members. I think one of the things that the communities, they've advocated the more robust community process. I think there's concerns about the, it is a regional process at a fairly high level, but communities want to get engaged at the community level, and I think there's probably lack of resourcing and that kind of engagement for community members. So a lot of questions are being asked, of their leadership as well. So I think as much as the announcement a year ago, I don't see the measuring sticks that have been achieved. Usually, when you put a measure and try to get things done, I don't see that happening. There's some major pieces there that were addressed, with the regional framework agreement, and I don't see the progress actually getting to that. So that's my take on that.
Okay, Al Coutts, you're still there. Others have gone home. Cliffs has gone home. They said it's not going to happen. You're still there. How come your company's still there?
Well, I think, Steve, we believe in the Ring of Fire. We like the resource potential there. We've spent a lot of time in the communities, we spent a lot of time on the ground, and we consider ourselves experts in the region from both a social and from a technical point of view. We're trying to develop a nickel mine. We see this as a good first step in the region. We agree with the minister that there needs to be a framework and understanding of how things are going to proceed between the First Nations and Ontario for the next 20, 50 years. But what we're asking for is to take some steps immediately, honoring the intent of the regional framework, but let's move this project forward and let's get permitting in mind.
How much money have you put into it so far, Noront?
We've put over $200 million into the project itself over a 7-year time frame, Steve.
And have got nothing back yet.
Well, we've delineated 2 ore bodies, a chromite ore body and a nickel, copper, platinum, palladium ore body. We've built a camp, and we spent a lot of time in the communities communicating, understanding their issues and needs. And we've also done an environmental assessment over the entire region. It took us 3 years to complete.
How much did Cliffs put in?
I won't speculate for how much Cliffs put in, but they would have put in a similar amount of money and effort.
$250 million, probably.
Probably.
Minister, by all means, but while you're formulating your response, $250 million put in by Cliffs, and they walked away and went home because they think this is never going to happen. Why are they wrong?
Well, there's no question that I think almost everybody agrees that ultimately the commodity market, the markets will decide exactly when somebody comes in for that particular project. And as Mr. Coutts has pointed out, I mean, they're focused on their nickel project. We're working closely with them, but they also have interest in the longer term in terms of the chromite, and that will be determined. But so we're keen to, we're remaining as committed as ever. We put $1 billion on the table as a commitment from the provincial government to deal with the transportation infrastructure that will be needed.
But how much of that have you spent so far?
We're working. We're going to be bringing forward. Well, this is an actual commitment that we obviously are looking forward to getting matched by the federal government. In fact, a week ago, with Minister Rickford, we signed off on a infrastructure transportation study corridor for First Nations in that particular region, which may indeed move to opening up the access. I do want to address a little bit, though, Grand Chief Yesno's point, and I appreciate it. There is nothing more important. We speak about we need to get the project right. I truly think that does mean that we need to make sure that the First Nations, Métis Nation of Ontario, but First Nations in particular, are seeing those benefits. The actual negotiation that took place and is taking place between Matawa First Nations and the province of Ontario is unprecedented. It's historic. The 9 First Nation chiefs came down to Queen's Park, met with Premier Wynne, myself, and Minister Zimmer, the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, in March of 2013, and said, we want to have a negotiation. We entered into that. Bob Ray is working on behalf of the Matawa First Nations. Frank Yakabuchi, the renowned former Supreme Court Justice, is working on behalf of the province.
Okay, but if all of that is true, why isn't he as optimistic and bullish on this as you clearly are?
There's no question that indeed the community engagement that Grand Chief Yesno referenced is absolutely vital, and we hear it a lot. We have provided resources, significant resources, to each of those communities to see that community engagement can take place. But it is a complicated project, and in terms of assuring that benefits go to the First Nations, I certainly understand that. I know that my friend Alan Coutts does as well, which is why we continue to work so hard to achieve those goals. But from our perspective, over the last year, a lot has happened, and this extraordinary find of chromite, let alone all the other materials, they are there, and the markets will in many ways determine when that happens. Meanwhile, we're working with Noront to see that project move forward.
You say a lot has happened, and I'm going to ask the Grand Chief about one thing that actually did just happen not that long ago, which was an agreement by the federal government of Canada and the province of Ontario to do a road study, think of almost $1 million, a road study, and the communities to figure out what kind of infrastructure ought to go where. How much consultation, first of all, did you have on that study?
Well, I'm familiar with it because the 4 First Nations actually had had agreed to look at an east-west corridor as far back as 2010.
So you're okay with this?
Well, you know, it's kind of like Johnny come lately. I think 4 years later, you're finally looking at something like this that was already identified by the chiefs 4 years ago. You know, and I think the only reason it's happening is because Cliffs has left the scene, and Ontario was only supporting the north-south corridor. They were not looking at any other option. These communities had requested to look at the east-west corridor 4 years ago. Now we get it 4 years later, and I think that's contributing to moving any project in the north, because that's a clear example. I think if Ontario and even the feds were engaging First Nations a lot, if they were listening to them, I think some of these issues could have been addressed a lot quicker.
Do you think, Al Coutts, that this agreement to study the roads and infrastructure, how significant a moving forward is that in terms of the whole project?
I think it's a good step forward, actually, Steve, because at one point in time we were talking about railroads or big industrial roads, talking about all sorts of ways of accessing the area. We had lots of different infrastructure views, and now we've moved that conversation from a north-south, east-west to an east-west corridor that I think the four communities can really rally around. It works for the mineral proponent, Noront, and it works for both levels of provincial and federal government. So it's a really good step, I think, getting some alignment and getting some traction in the area.
So, Minister Gravel, this basically settles it. It's going to be an east-west situation, not north-south.
What this speaks to about is community access in terms of the, obviously, four communities, Webekwe, Nishnandaga, Ibamatung, and Nabinimik. It speaks to opportunities for actual full community access. So this is as much about that as it quite frankly is about any particular project. One of the things that I've always said, and I think we agree, is that the Ring of Fire isn't simply about getting access to a mine site, it's about having the opportunity to open up the north, much like Grand Chief Yes-No reference. The important thing about this particular project and proposal is it's First Nation initiative. They are very, very keen to make sure that they are very much at the front end of making the decisions as to where the access roads go, and they're going to be able to do that through this study. So this will move it in this direction, which is not to say that somewhere down the line there'll be other opportunities in terms of access or corridors, but this study certainly is a key one. That's why we were so pleased to share the funding costs of it's 790,000 actually with the federal government. It was great to
Let me pick up on that because I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here to say the Premier of Ontario and the Prime Minister of Canada are not on each other's Christmas card lists, right? That hasn't been a great relationship for quite a while. They did have admittedly one meeting where they smiled for the cameras and, draw from that what you will. Are you going to go as far as to say that this represents a potentially new era in federal Ontario cooperation?
Well, to be absolutely accurate, Minister Greg Rickford, the Minister of Natural Resources, the Minister responsible for FedNor, he and I worked very, very hard to maintain a very positive relationship throughout some of the more challenging times. I certainly understand that we're putting, for good reason, pressure on the federal government to provide more resources in a more fair way. But in terms of this particular work that he and I are doing, we've kept in touch. And after Premier Wynne and Prime Minister Harper met later in January, I went to Ottawa and I sat down and had a very formal meeting with Minister Rickford and said, certainly I'm going to be continuing to come and ask you to match the dollars we put in place in terms of infrastructure, but he and I agreed, let's work together on specific projects that have got a strategic connection to potentially opening up the Ring of Fire. This proposal is one of the best examples that you can make of that. Four First Nations coming together, asking for support for a study for a transportation corridor. So there, Minister Rickford and I were together on the stage last week at the Prospectors and Developers Association conference, making that announcement with 3 of the 4 First Nation chiefs there with us speaking as well. The other First Nation chief had a personal tragedy in the community and wasn't able to be there. So this was a very significant step, and certainly from a provincial point of view, I'm looking forward to seeing more of that kind of support from the federal government.
Okay. Let me ask the Grand Chief about politics. There's a lot of politics at play here. You've got federal, provincial politics. You have politics within First Nations communities. You have politics between governments and First Nations community. You have corporate interests here as well. Is there simply too much politics at play here to make this ever happen? What's your view?
I think, I agree, but we have a role to play in engaging, various players in that, and I think that's what's actually missing with this whole event. I'm part of like I said, I'm part of one of the communities, Matawa communities, but I end up meeting with an awful lot of other First Nations and other interests in both industry, municipalities, other groups that have a concern. And I think what's lacking here is a holistic view of developing the North. We don't have a strategy for the North. The province is only looking at the Ring of Fire and singularly, but we got so many other communities up north that we need to address the infrastructure deficits on energy and road access all throughout the north.
Can I ask you about that? How many, in the Anishinaabe Nation, how many of your communities are still having to boil water because the water's not safe to drink?
There's 22 communities, and 8 of them over 10 years. One in the Ring of Fire is close to 15 years. They've been under boil water advisory.
15 years?
Yes.
All right, so how frustrated are you that those issues persist while there seems to be a great deal of energy and interest in moving this issue forward?
It is frustrating because that's what the community are saying. People are talking about billions of dollars that's going to be invested in that. And my water, I have to boil. I have to pay a bag of milk that's $16 or $24. I pay $5 here in Thunder Bay. And you talk to me about this multi-billion-dollar event, and I think we got a different outcome that we're really not prepared. Because if we're not addressing the issues that matter to the people in the community.
Minister Gravel, I know First Nations are technically, constitutionally, a national concern. It is the issue the federal government is supposed to be seized with. Having said that, how do you make any progress when this situation persists?
Well, Premier Wynne has been very directly involved and very publicly involved. I think you've seen her position in terms of missing and murdered Aboriginal women, the belief that we need to have a national inquiry, and she was at the gathering recently. We were actually, Premier and I were together at the Matawa First Nations annual general meeting last summer and spoke about the issues that Grand Chief Yesno is speaking about and talked about how we do have real expertise related to water. I don't want to get myself in too much trouble, but we recognize that despite the constitutional, jurisdictional issues, that indeed the province, I think, has a strong role to play. And I do just quickly want to respond, if I may, to Grand Chief's earlier comments at the beginning. Certainly, we see the Ring of Fire as an absolute priority, but we do recognize that there's a requirement for us to be involved with certainly all the First Nation. That certainly includes Anishinaabe Nation. Grand Chief Yesno is the Grand Chief of 49 First Nations. And we are working with them in terms of understanding there need to be some decisions made in infrastructure.
Is that too complicated a governance structure for you to come to any agreements?
Well, I want to be able to obviously work in this positive. We are working in this positive way, and we're seeing progress. It's frustrating for some. People want to see things move more quickly. People tell us all the time, why isn't the Ring of Fire moving forward more quickly? And in the same breath, saying, but we got to make sure you do the consultation process correctly. Well, it's interesting. There's much more to the mining sector than the Ring of Fire. We as a ministry and as a government are proud of that, and just unveiled our new. We're going to have a new refreshed mineral development strategy. So we recognize that consultation, working so closely with the Aboriginal communities is vital. We're going to keep doing that. Meanwhile, working as close as we can to see companies like Noront move forward.
And I'm going to ask Noront this question. Do you think it would help move the yardsticks along if you were, for example, to say, I promise that when this happens, X percentage of the jobs will go to First Nations people?
Absolutely. I mean, we're doing this because we think we can be part of the solution to what the Grand Chief is mentioning. We can't do it all. We're a relatively small mining company, but we're doing this for social reasons, not just economic reasons. We want those communities to prosper. We want them to have jobs, training. We want the bag of milk to go down because we've got access roads into those communities. We can do part of that. We've set up an Aboriginal Training Alliance with Matawa First Nation, with the local college here, Confederation College, and we've trained almost 400 local people to take jobs at our mines. And we hired our first grad last week. A cook medic is now working from Martin Falls up at our camp, and that's the start. And that's how the mining companies can play a role. We want this to be a success for everyone involved. We want the benefits to accrue to all the communities like this one, like Thunder Bay, like Pickle Lake. A lot of the northern communities are depending on progress here to encourage more economic activity.
So I suggested X percent of the jobs have to go to First Nations. What's X?
We will hire as many qualified candidates as there are. and we're going to make sure there are lots and lots. We're going to have about 500 full-time jobs there, Steve, and we'd like to see as many of them, 50%, you know. I mean, you know, we need to train those people, though, to take those jobs and to participate.
Grand Chief, how does that sound to you?
Well, I think if the government wants to walk the talk in terms of new relationship on that, I think employment thresholds should be put in place and training programs to go with that. It's easier. I mean, it's very easy to say, yeah, as Mr. Coates has just said, qualified people. Well, that's going to be a challenge. I think, you know, we need the government and industry to walk their talk, you know, and see if that really will meet the thresholds for employment participation by our people.
Is this really ever going to happen?
Absolutely, it is. It's happening. It's challenging. The timing is difficult. Again, there is such a sense this should be. Why isn't it happening more quickly? Well, it is happening. It needs to be done right. And that we say that and we mean it. Those aren't just words. Which is why the work that we're doing with the First Nations is so vital. Why the work that may I say Noront is doing. There is a real future. For every northern community, for certainly a significant number of First Nation communities with these opportunities that are there.
You do know Cliffs backed out because they said there is zero chance this will ever happen.
There's a larger story to Cliffs, perhaps we shouldn't get into that. Larger story in terms of the overall story with Cliffs, and I understand that. But they are one company. There is another company, and there are others. Look, Goldcorp recently purchased the assets for Probe Mines, who have assets in the Ring of Fire and have actually a potential gold mine near Chapleau. There's a lot more to this, but what we are working on the basis that indeed people like Alan Coates, you aren't going to give up, Alan, and you're moving forward. We're working with you to try and help that happen, and we want to see everybody in the North benefit, and certainly very much at the front end of that is making sure the First Nations see benefits.
I have 30 seconds left in this segment, which is enough time for me to ask you, because this has been a public fight that you've been involved with, and I'm talking now about your health. You had a hell of a fight with cancer. You look okay. How are you?
Thank you for asking. I'm doing very, very well. I've got huge support from obviously friends and family. I really, honestly, am feeling stronger every day. People do ask me every day, and they note that I look quite well, and that's because I feel well. So my thanks to you for asking. I couldn't be more grateful for the support. I'm a lucky guy to be doing this job and to be feeling as well as I am.
Good stuff. Gentlemen, we thank you for kicking off our program tonight here at the Thunder Bay Community Auditorium. It's good of all of you to join us.
Great. Thank you very much,
Thanks
Steve.
so much. Well, as mentioned, we are here at TBCA in this gorgeous theater, and Fort Frances is something we want to talk about right now. Alan, you just went right into my shot, shaking hands with everybody. It was a wonderful gesture. It was a beautiful, lovely gesture, and you screwed up my shot, but that's okay. Let's talk about Fort Frances because we got another guest here. Fort Frances is a community like many others in the Northwest. It's adjusting to new economic realities, and joining us now for her perspective is Tanis Drysdale. She's economic development consultant with the town of Fort Frances, which is, am I right, about 350 clicks west of here?
Absolutely.
Does that sound right? All right. Are we going to, we'll put the map up and we'll show everybody where that is. Just describe Fort Frances for us, if you would, Tanis.
So, Fort Frances is about 3.5 hours west of Thunder Bay. We are situated on the Rainy River on the Canada-US border. So, about 8,000 folks live in Fort Frances, a neighboring community, Couchiching, beside us, and in a district of about 20,000.
What time zone is it in?
It is in the central time zone.
So you're in the same time as Winnipeg, not Toronto.
Absolutely.
Does that make you feel even more remote than you already are?
It doesn't make us feel more remote. It often confuses the times of meetings.
Indeed. Accurate to describe Fort Frances as kind of a typical forestry town?
Absolutely. For the last 100 years, we've been a pulp and paper community. Up until May of this year, 800 individuals, remember 8,000 folks live in our town, 800 of them directly working in the mill over time. So 1 in 10 people directly working in the pulp and paper industry, and probably another 3 indirectly in the forests and other places. So we were a forestry community.
Has the mix of the economy in Fort Frances changed at all over the last decade or so?
A little bit.
How so?
Still forestry, and still primarily forestry, Steve, but there has been an OSB mill open to the west of us a little bit. So the way we're utilizing the forest has changed a bit. And of course this May with the closure of the pulp and paper mill, that's been a dramatic change.
Tell us about that. What's the impact been?
So that's not a good day. when they call you up and they tell you there's going to be a permanent idling of your mill in your community. For 100 years, it's the economic reason for your community. People live and work in the mill for 3 or 4 generations. It's devastating. It's 20 to 25% of the tax base, and there's 2 ways you can go. You can decide to roll up the carpets and move on, or you can decide that this is the beginning of a new opportunity in your community. And Mayor and Council in Fort Frances undertook the second option. They've decided that there's going to be boundless opportunities in the future, not only in forestry, but in mining and in tourism. They put together a comprehensive plan and brought in some really smart folks to help me facilitate a new era.
That's a great local spirit,
Yeah.
but what does it really look like, when the rubber hits the road?
Well, what it really looks like, and what it's going to really look like, is generational change. You don't go from being a pulp and paper town where you're a single industry to this new mecca of economic development in 2 or 3 years. It's going to be 10 to 20 years to fight our way back. And we're going to need lots of help from the federal and provincial government, and we're going to have to come together as a community, which we're doing rather brilliantly, embracing this new time.
Do you have any sense about what the businesses, the industries, the economic development of the future looks like?
Sure, it looks very similar to the economic development of the past, but innovative and seizing the opportunities that we think are out there. Specialty papers versus newsprint, right? We all had a Tim Hortons coffee probably this morning and we rolled up the rim. That's a paper product, right? So just because newsprint is a transitional industry doesn't mean that paper in general isn't. So specialty papers, we hope, is going to be a part of our future. And we have a mine opening just down the road. We're hoping that we become a supply and service center for that. And we fully intend to become the next hometown to the folks that move into the new gold mine.
Tanis, as much as I love Tim Hortons because they sponsor the home stadium of my favorite football team, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, this is TVO. We don't run commercials here, okay? One other thing that we haven't mentioned, or maybe just tangentially so far, you do have a bit of gold there, don't you?
We do have a bit of gold.
So what's the potential for that?
So in the next couple of years, there's an expectation there'll be 600 new jobs at a gold mine that's about 60 kilometers away from the town of Fort Frances. So we're the largest service center for that community. 450 jobs in the construction. Now, how long that gold mine runs and lasts will not be the 100 years of forestry. Mm-hmm. So I think, Steve, we have the opportunity, not only in Fort Frances, but in other communities as we chart a new course in this post-pulp and paper world, to take the breakdown of the forest industry related to newsprint and use that as an opportunity to diversify the economy. So we don't just jump over and all of a sudden become a mining community. We say, okay, we're going to make the maximized use of that mine, and we're going to also then embrace forestry in a new way and start to diversify our economy. So we don't find ourselves in this position 20 or 30 years down the road.
I presume, though, that the people who lost their jobs in the mill, it's a whole different set of skills from that to mining. So I imagine that those jobs in the mine are going to be new and different people and not the people who just lost their jobs, right?
Yeah. There'll be a small crossover, I think, with some of the equipment and engineering, but you're right. There will be new folks. So that's why it's really important to embrace forest industry. There's Steve, the trees are still in the forest, and they still have to be used. So we have not written off that part of our future. We're just embracing a new future to be more diversified.
Last question. How do you keep the spirits of everybody up when things can look so bleak?
So you have 2 choices. You roll up the carpet.
Now, we heard that
or
one,
you
I know,
decide,
but really
or you
here.
decide to move forward. Look, people in Northwestern Ontario and Northern Ontario in general carry their hometowns in their hearts. We do not give up easily, and we are not going to leave. So given those choices, we've decided we're going to stay and we're going to make this work. And you know what? The future could be even better than the past was.
Tanis Drysdale, it's really good of you to make the long trip here
Thank
to
you.
Thunder Bay and join us for our program tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Appreciate it. Okay, let's continue our conversation here. Yeah, I heard some applause. That's okay if you want. Okay, the Ring of Fire may be the headline for those living outside of Thunder Bay, but this has long, as was just suggested, been forestry and mining country with some of the richest gold deposits in Canada here. So we're going to talk about that now, and joining us now for more, we welcome John Mason. He's project manager in mining services with the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission. Genevieve Knauf, who is the founder of GCK Consulting Limited. Charles Sertwell, President, CEO, Northern Policy Institute, and Jim Matter, who is the president of Confederation College. And if you're in applauding mood, let's welcome this group as well, shall we? Well, John, let's hit this on the head. If you live south of the French River, maybe the only thing you hear about this part of the province is ring of fire, ring of fire, ring of fire. Is that the whole story?
Certainly not, Steve. The opportunity to illustrate today that Northwestern Ontario is a significant contributor to the mining industry in Canada. We produce about 20% of Canada's gold in any given year. So that mineral wealth, which is about 900,000 ounces, creates prosperity, economic wealth for all of Ontario.
How many jobs you
not
figure?
Just the north. That's about 3,500 jobs in 5 mines in the Northwest. We'll add 5 new mines in the next 4 years, one of which we just heard from Tanis Drysdale, the New Gold Project. That'll add another 1,500 direct jobs, and you're looking at ratios of 3 to 1, indirect and induced jobs. So you're looking at a large workforce and a number of businesses that will flow in and out of the service and supply industry, feeding that piece. We produce palladium. We're also going to be producing graphite and nickel copper, as Alan Coote spoke about earlier from the Noront project.
Can you give us a sense of what the average annual income for the people who work in that would be?
It's somewhere in the neighborhood. Let me reference this. Ontario Mining Association, Rotman School, just completed a a major study at the end of 2014. The average wage was portrayed as $145,000 per year in an average gold mine. So the average gold mine was studied, and these are interesting numbers for Ontario as well. I'll just leave you with 2. $330 million will flow in terms of GDP contribution from that one mine, and about $100 million in terms of taxes and royalties from that one gold mine. Again, it's an average generic Northern Ontario mine, so many of the mines we're speaking about now would fit into that piece. So that $100 million goes to all levels of government.
Those are good paying jobs.
Very, very much so. It is the highest paying industry in the world.
Gotcha. Okay, Genevieve, let me go to you now. As we just heard, forestry sector took quite a hit over the last decade and certainly over the past year. Give us your sense of where things stand now in forestry in Northwestern Ontario.
Well, where they stand now, it's, for me, I'm so optimistic. When I entered the industry and we suffered that down cycle, I was just sort of starting or mid-career, and I was listening to everybody around me, those senior to me, saying that, this is the sunset industry. Well, I heard that in 2009. In 2014, it's just now starting to come back. But we're coming back in a different way. It's not just the sawmills coming back online, although they are, the few pulp mills that are running in the region, but it's new companies coming in, like a Rentec from California, or the Aditya Birla Group buying a pulp mill in Terrace Bay, looking to actually transform it into making fluff pulp or rayon for the textile industry. So it's recovering in a different way. It's never going to recover to the heyday that it was before the downturn. We were harvesting somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 million cubic meters at that point, and in the last 3 years it's only averaged about half of that. So it is recovering, and it's interesting, as it's recovering, there's new opportunities. There's new opportunities for First Nations to become more involved, for municipalities to have more of a say in how the resource is managed. There's a few forests across the region that, as a result of several bankruptcies that happened during the downturn, they're under new management regimes. Some of them run by wholly owned First Nations companies. And there was one Crown Corporation created, a local forest management company, where municipalities, First Nations, educated members of the community have a say in how the forest is managed. It's a very different model than what we had pre the downturn. So it's very exciting.
Jim, I guess part of your job at your post-secondary institution is to make sure you train the people who are going to go into these jobs.
Absolutely.
How's that going?
I wish I could produce more graduates. We have 7,000 students in any one year, 55 programs. We have the highest employment rate for the last 3 years across the college system.
What is it?
Well, sitting around 89% to 90%. That's the total employment rate. The related employment rate is also highest in the province as well.
So let me just get this right. If you graduate from Confederation College, 89 out of 100 grads are going to get a job in the area in which they studied.
Well, it's 6 months after the graduation is when that survey is done. They're employed. For the ones who are in the areas they're studied, they're about 65%, and that's also the highest in the province.
Is this for mining and forestry?
Right across the board. So, you know, we've got 55 programs, and in mining there's more than 58 occupations, in forestry a similar type of number, but we train people right across the board. If I could produce double the number of technologists right now and tradespeople, they would all be eaten up in 2 seconds. You know, the program here is about natural resources, but this past week I've been meeting with manufacturers, Bombardier, a whole variety of smaller manufacturing. The same story that's there. They need people now, let alone as we go ahead with the further developments of forestry and of mining.
You probably know Rick Miner, right? Who
Yes.
made the, I guess, Seneca College former
Absolutely.
president? Talked about jobs without people and people without jobs.
Right.
Are you making those connections better now?
You know, absolutely. Earlier on in your interviews, you spoke, or Al Coote spoke about the relationship we have with Noront, that relationships with Noront, the Matawa communities, and KCATs. What's critically important to us is to work with industry to clearly define what the skill sets are that they need in order to fill those jobs. So that's the Ring of Fire Aboriginal Training Alliance is a simple example of that. Every one of our programs has an advisory committee that meets on a regular basis and tells us what we exactly need to be employed in that field.
Charles, is this still a boom-bust economy up here that we're talking about?
Well, I'm not entirely sure it ever was. If you look at the data around who's in what field, you know, the forestry and mining, even in '87, only took up about 10, 12, 13% of the overall workforce. You know, kids still needed an education. People still needed to get their health care. Tourists still came to town and stayed in hotels and needed restaurants. Lots of those sectors of the economy were still stable and predictable, and the jobs are still there. I'm going to sneak and cheat and talk about Jim's point.
Okay.
Jim's point around the successful employment. It's one of the most frustrating things. I'm new to the region. I've only been only living in Thunder Bay 18 months.
Where are you from?
I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Did you move from Halifax to here?
I did all the way.
How come?
Because I was offered a job here. Lots of opportunities here in Northern Ontario.
All right, good to know.
And for those watching this show, this is the
Yeah.
point that I'm going to make. You know, we look
Absolutely.
at the out migration numbers. We talk about the 17 to 34-year-olds that are routinely leaving our communities, and it's very frustrating because when you look at Jim's performance numbers on the college system, but even if you look at the system overall, our youth employment, our participation rate, our unemployment rates are better than the provincial and the national averages. I don't know where these kids are going, but if they think they're going to find the grass is greener, they're wrong. The jobs are here, and all they need to do is look around.
Well, okay, I get that you want to make that point. Now I'm going to do a little pushback of my own here. We hear that the biggest exports from Northern Ontario, Northwestern Ontario, are trees, ore, and kids. You're saying that's not the case?
Well, unfortunately, on the kids' side, that is the case. One of our biggest numbers, that the out migration continues to occur. Our 17 to 34-year-olds are leaving at rates that are well above the rest of the country. And that my point to them is, I'm not entirely sure what they're making those decisions based on. You know, you heard Tanis talk a moment ago about the confidence and the willingness to kind of stay, tough it out, and find a better way. And we're finding them. We're finding them in the mining sector. We're finding them in the forestry sector. You know, if you look in Kenora District, for example, we've seen the cultural and entertainment industries grow in the last 3 years, somewhere around 30%. Here in Thunder Bay, we've seen science, technology, and technical trades grow another 30 or 40% in those 3 years.
Well, in
So-
entertainment here. Everybody's been here, right? Everybody who's anybody has performed in this hall. It's incredible. They've got all the posters in the back room there.
That's because we've got all those people with the high-paying jobs who can pay the tickets.
There you go.
That's
Yeah,
right.
There you
Paul
go.
Schaefer Road out here.
That's right. We are on. That's right. A
We
good
are.
point. We're on Paul Schaefer Road. Anybody who watches a Letterman show knows all that. John, talk to me about the biggest challenge in your view for the resource economy today. What do you think it is?
A couple answers to that one, Steve. I think one of the pieces is municipalities getting ready and regions getting ready for what's happening. And it's all about, let's talk about workforce. Things like one of the biggest challenges right out there right now is electricity in terms of it's expensive in Ontario, as we know. What about transmission and supply to projects? That's a huge issue going forward. Workforce pieces on skilled trades and certain professionals like metallurgists and certain engineers are required. That's a key need. Permits through Ontario and through the federal government that's a long path to go down to bring a project into production. It's all money out from the private sector until that mine comes on. The Aboriginal consultation piece is there, and that's a very strong piece in terms of developing partnerships going forward. The financial side, the capital cost of projects, anywhere from $300 to $900 million is required to build a mine. That's after 10 years of exploration potentially on the front end. So, which is one of the pieces we haven't spoken about as well. The grassroots exploration projects the projects aren't ready to pop as new mines that were discovered over the last decade. They're in a global poor place right now in terms of being able to raise cash. That's been very one of the themes at the Prospectors Convention that Minister Gravel spoke about. So those 4 years have been bad. We're living off discoveries in the past, and this is not a Northwest Ontario piece. This is a global observation.
Let me follow up on one of the things on your list, and that's the price of electricity. We do not live in the days of Ontario Hydro of 40 years ago now, where the provinces prepared through Ontario Hydro to subsidize the price we pay for electricity, right? Those days are gone. So, the price of electricity up here, as we all know, is higher. What do you want anybody to do about that?
I think the opportunity to look at other forms of electricity generation, whether it be from gas, cogeneration opportunities, the issue of perhaps using biomass in a better fashion. There's a lot more opportunities for research and innovation.
They're doing that at Atikokan, aren't they?
They are. They really are with that particular facility, the Atikokan Generating Station, and Thunder Bay as well, both on biomass at this particular point as peaking plants. There are opportunities, I would think, as well to work in a collaborative sense with First Nations. On the power side, tremendous water resources, the ultimate renewable resource, in my opinion, that can be brought in. So hypothetically, when when wires are put into places like Ring of Fire and the 4 signatory communities to the road study, it's not all about power going one way. Potentially power can be generated on the rivers of those particular locales. And there have been numerous studies already over the last 25 years by engineering groups and the electrical entities of Ontario to identify these resources, as well as First Nations. They're well aware of these resources. That power can go back the other way. And that's one of the visions, I believe, of the First Nation communities and the industry as well.
Genevieve, your view on the biggest challenge right now to the resource economy?
You know, John hit a lot of them. What I would like to focus on is, you know, we really haven't had in the last decade a time when both forestry and mining were booming. And I wonder that if they did, what we would do about the workforce gaps. So I understand this concept of, you know, putting on training programs at the college, pumping out grads, and the university pumping out grads. But I think we need to, at the same time as we find ourselves in a new economy, we need to reinvent these two sectors. We have to look at alternative ways of training people, whether it's in their home communities, on the job, through mentoring, through job shadowing, getting them out to the workforce quicker. I think that's going to be a significant gap in the future. And I speak on that topic because that's what one of my companies is working on. But if I put my forest industry hat back on, I would concentrate on the issue of power. And it's not just about how we're generating it or the infrastructure needed, it's about what we're charging the private sector to access that power. In neighboring jurisdictions around us, in different provinces to the south of us in the US, governments are giving significant subsidies to industries if they promise to come here.
Well, the Ontario government says it's subsidizing the cost of electricity up here as well. Not nearly as much as you want, I know, but they would say they're doing some.
And the government is they have been. There are programs in place. It just needs to go further in those times when you're looking to actually develop. The most expensive time, as John talked about, especially in mining or in any industry, is when you're constructing or you're building because you're not making your products or you're not generating any revenue. That's the times that you need to help them out and actually give them a break. The government sort of can look past the cost of subsidizing that with what that company is bringing in jobs, tax revenue, just the economy actually being stronger, and look past the initial investment.
Jim, if the industries that we've talked about are transforming, are you transforming the way you teach people in order that they will be ready to go when these transformations are complete?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 9 campuses across Northwestern Ontario. We actually deliver into 70 communities. We use that with technology. We're on site and supporting people as well as using technology and sharing our knowledge base across the 6 northern colleges to
What's your budget?
make that work as well. Ours is an operational budget of $70 million. And boy, if there was more there, we could certainly use it. One of the points, though, and one of the challenges or opportunities here is for Aboriginal people in those remote communities to fully be engaged and have the education and learning to be fully engaged in these opportunities. So
Got
they need
apprenticeships
skills.
on the map as well?
Oh, apprenticeship is dead center in this. Of those 55 different occupation codes, many of them involve apprenticeships. So with the Ring of Fire in remote communities, we commence our apprenticeship programs that are there, our trades programs. They have to often our students have to come out to larger centers in order to access the equipment, the training to finish a full apprenticeship program. But starting in those remote communities is critically important to make it work. You know, one of the elements that was mentioned earlier, as youth youth understanding the opportunities that are there. We actually start our programs in high school. I have 1,600 students that are part of dual credits, school, college, work initiative programs, which start those opportunities in high school, often associated with trades. Trades in this province get a bit of a rough time. People don't really understand the huge opportunities that are here. Spent some time out in Alberta, dramatically different in terms of their view towards trades jobs that are here. So we start our programs, including trades jobs in high school, and boy, those people are doing well.
So the bigger project actually is to try to convince parents that not everybody has to be a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant.
Can I quote you on that? Absolutely. It is phenomenally well paid. Again, John's referencing $100,000 jobs, very, very well represented, and portable jobs that can be taken where you want. You can travel the world as a tradesperson if you wish to make that thing happen. So phenomenal opportunities.
Charles, I didn't ask you yet what you believe the number one impediment to the resource economy is right now.
Well, you've heard it. It's infrastructure, and in particular, the cost of electricity. You know, you talk about subsidization and this issue around how much subsidy are being provided to different areas. We forget that in this country, the infrastructure was built a long time ago. So companies that locate in Southern Ontario are taking advantage of subsidies that are in place from 1867 going forward. Now we're talking about making a Trans-Canada Highway that actually looks like a Trans-Canada Highway that people in the GTA would be familiar with. Our Trans-Canada Highway is 2 lanes, and it's often blocked. So it doesn't look at all like yours. It's not your father's Oldsmobile. Is that how that commercial goes?
That's right.
And it's the same sort of issue around electricity, right? We talk about the price of electricity, but even getting electricity. You heard about the road study when you were talking about the Ring of Fire. Well, it's not a road study. It's an infrastructure study. It's an infrastructure corridor. They're
What's
talking
the
about
difference?
roads. They're talking about electrification. They're talking about running electrical lines along that. They're talking about cable and communications cable. They're talking about accessing those communities and creating an access to the rest of the world that you and me and lots of other people take for granted that these communities have never experienced. That investment was made in the rest of this country a long time ago, and we've all picked it up in our federal taxes ever since then. Now we're expecting, in many cases, the private companies to pick up 40, 50, 60% of that cost. So, you know, when we talk about subsidies, we have to be awful careful and make sure that we're doing apples-to-apples comparisons.
Okay, having said that, you did hear the discussion around the Ring of Fire, and of course, it's a huge part of the potential future here. Do you think you are going to be still living here and or alive when that ever happens?
You know what, from my perspective, if they build the East-West Road or the East-West Corridor and that's all they ever do, that'll be a huge leap forward. It'll change the lives of the people in those 4 communities. It'll allow folks in the mining and the forestry industry ready access into that rich resource to kind of start experimenting, exploring, seeing what else is potentially there, what else may well have a market value that's above chromite, for example. And that to me would be a win. If nothing else happens in the Ring of Fire in the next 10 years than that road or that corridor, I'll take it.
Really?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't want more than that. You want more than that.
Absolutely,
but you're
I
not
want more than that, but I'm trying to manage my expectations.
Gotcha. Genevieve, how about you? Do you think you're going to be alive or around when this thing finally gets going? If it does get going?
I'm an eternal optimist. I have to. I own a small business in Ontario. So I don't know about what level the mine will be developed at, but that road, that infrastructure, that's key. In 2006, the Ontario government commissioned Dr. Bob Rosehart as the economic facilitator for Northwestern Ontario, and one of his key recommendations or findings was the necessity of actually putting that road in there. Not just electricity, but also telecommunications. Some of these areas are just absolutely not connected to the rest of the world. And to pick up on one of the points that Charles made, we also should remember how we traditionally paid for a lot of the infrastructure that we enjoy in Ontario through crown dues paid on the extraction of natural resources in Northern Ontario. So this is the time where we need the investment in infrastructure up north to actually continue to extract those natural resources and pay back to the provincial coffers at the same time.
I'm trying to remember. Bob Rosehart was president of Lakehead University?
Well, he was, and then I think he was the president of Wilfrid Laurier,
Yeah.
and he was seconded to this position, I think, for about a year or 18 months. And his report, although it's still sitting there, there's so much that still needs to be done from those recommendations.
Well, I was going to say, he was a guy, if I recall, that they actually listened to at Queen's Park.
I agree.
So what's going on?
Well, I think since then we've had some different political parties in a minority position, but now we have a political party in a majority position, and I think we're at the point right now where it is the time for a significant investment in infrastructure in the north.
Is there an expectation that now that there is a majority government at Queen's Park, more progress can be made? Can you connect those two dots?
I believe so. I think there has to be it may sound corny or simplistic, there has to be a regrounding to look at Ontario as a unit and realize what did build Bay Street and what could actually work to shore up the deficit in Ontario. I think the fact of the matter is we're not a one-trick pony in the north with respect to resource sector. We have to look upon this as an Ontario set of solutions in terms of driving various businesses, IT, innovation, manufacturing. I think the forestry, energy, and mining platform are significant. I would challenge municipalities and regions to get mining ready. That's one of the things that Thunder Bay's done. Actually,
What does that mean, get mining
it's
ready?
It's a unique program to the world where now we're seeing British Columbia, communities in northeastern Ontario, countries in South America like Colombia, as well as Ecuador, looking at all of the aspects of the mining sector, including all the requirements. Some of the things we talked about today. Electricity, transportation infrastructure, the workforce piece. What kind of housing do you require? What's required in terms of service and supply industries that feed in and out of that? And at the end of the day, that becomes a piece that will also go horizontal. So the tradesperson that graduates or does pre-trades and is a graduate journeyman can actually develop in other sectors as well. But that'll get your region. So we've done this in Thunder Bay. This is the first in the world, the first study in the world to be done. SNC-Lavalin led the charge, 2012 and 13. We're now rolling out 52 recommendations from that study. So that study now, as I mentioned, has gone to various parts of the world, and it's been customized to the needs. It can be driven by one project. In our case, it was driven by 10 projects, 10 mining projects. And now we're going to see 4 or 5 new gold projects funnel in as commodity prices change and as that dynamic world takes place. And I am an optimist that the world will need stainless steel at some point. Chromite will be developed. All those things will feed into that. So I suggest that other jurisdictions should become mining ready. And it could be Goderich on the back of salt. It could be industrial minerals in southern Ontario. It could be the far north, none of it in NWT. But to me, that's an important piece. That prepares a game plan for that region, that municipality. Our partner was 4M First Nation. There's a strong Aboriginal role in our modus operandi, and regional partners like the college and other folks that are in the audience today were part of that partnership. Put $500,000 in place and go for it. Run it. You need a plan.
You've got no enthusiasm for this at all. No, I can tell. Charles, tell me one thing you think that will really propel this region forward over the next decade.
People in the GTA understanding that natural resource economy drives what happens there. The voters are there, and they need to understand that their jobs and their future depend on what happens here. I'm looking around the room, I'm looking at your cameras, I'm looking at your microphone, I'm looking at the screens here. All of this wouldn't exist without mining. That's not even to mention the direct jobs tied to mining finance on Bay Street and the wonderful high-paying jobs that we're creating downtown Toronto. But the fact is that everything that we take for granted in our knowledge economy, computers, satellites, internet towers, all of it requires the stuff that we take out of the ground.
Genevieve, the fact that people south of the French River probably don't know as much about this sector as you would like them to, what are the consequences or ramifications of all of that?
Well, if you remove yourself from the actual economy, the basis of a healthy foundation of the economy, you start to allow those that can attack your economy, non-governmental environmental agencies, spreading mistruths or the stretching of the truth. Then instead of supporting your industry, in Ontario we have one of the most stringent environmental management systems in the world. I would test it against any other jurisdiction. Yet we're constantly attacked by environmentalists of depleting the deforestation, which does not happen in Ontario. Deforestation does not occur in Ontario. For every tree that's cut, trees are planted. However, the forest industry is always on the defensive, and we are typically arguing against fellow Ontarians in Southern Ontario. That's just a reality.
Jim, give you the last word on this.
Well, I'd love to have more students come from the south to the north to fall in love with the place, obviously get the skills to stay here and grow their families here. This is a fantastic place. You can tell all of us are just a little enthusiastic about the place that we have. But we have a program with Northern College. It's called Study North, which is purposefully there to have people come into our open seats in our programs, fall in love with it. I'd love to see them here.
Well, we'd love to have seen you here. It's been great having you all on the program tonight here in Thunder Bay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.